Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa ba'd. This is the 25th lesson from the three fundamental principles al-Usul al-Thalatha, and today inshallah we'll be continuing and we'll start to talk about al-Hijrah inshallah, which is immigrating for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said ba'daha umira bil hijrati ila Medina. Of course this is talking about after the 3 years that the salat became an obligation upon the Muslims, that the Prophet ﷺ prayed in Mecca for 3 more years, and then after that he was ordered to migrate to Medina. He said, وَالْهِجْرَةُ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ مِنْ بَلَدِ الشِّرْكِ إِلَى بَلَدِ الْإِسْلَامِ وَهِيَ بَاقِيَةٌ إِلَى أَنْ تَقُومَ السَّاعَةُ وَدَلِيلُ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ قالوا ألم تكن أرض الله واسعة فتهاجروا فيها فأولئك مأواهم جهنم وساءت مصيرا إلى المستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان لا يستطيعون حيلة ولا يهتدون سبيلا فأولئك أسأل الله أن يعفو عنهم وكان الله عفوا غفورا. وقوله تعالى يا عبادي الذين آمنوا أن أرضي واسعة فإياي فاعبدون. So here the author, Imam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah, he said, وَالْحِجْرَةُ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى هَذِهِ أُمَّةِ مِنْ بَلَدِ الشِّرْكِ إِلَى بَلَدِ الْإِسْلَامِ. So here he says that the migration. Well, the word hijrah, it comes from the word hajara yahjuru, hajaran wa hijranan. These are the masadir of this verb. Hajara yahjuru, it means to like either taraka shay, or shakhsan, or a'rada anhu. Okay, so it means to either leave off something or to abandon somebody, to abandon somebody and leave that person. And this is from hajara yahjuru. And this is the meaning of that. It means taraka aw a'rada an shay. Alright, so in the masdar is hajran wa hijranan. The word hijra, it actually comes from the verb from the form of the verb hajara yuhajiru muhajiratan. And we use the word hijrah as the masdar for this verb, and the person who does this action is a muhajir. And this is the verb that actually means to leave a country of disobedience or shirk or kufr and go to a country where the person can practice his religion freely and all the tenets of his religion. So he said, well, hijratu faridatun. And of course the faridah, it means an obligation, wajib. And it's of two types. You have the wajib al-aini and the wajib al-kafa'i. The wajib al-aini, it means that this is an obligation upon every single person, without with no exceptions, basically. For example, like the salawat al-khams, Sawm Ramadan. The only exception if a person has reached an old age and he's no longer able to fast, but then he still has to feed, the Ashrat al-Masakin. But still it's an obligation. Also the obligation of Hajj for the person who has the capability of doing it. So these are the fara'id. These are faridat, what you call farad al-ayn. Farad al-ayn or wajib al-ayni. But the farad al-ayn is the terminology that's used. And this is on everybody. If the person has the money to once the amount of money that he has reached the nisab to pay zakat, and it's hala alayhi al-hawl, which is that he's had that money in his possession for 1 year, then it's wajib farad ayn on every single person that has this to pay the zakat. For the people that don't have that, then they don't have to pay the zakat. So, and then you have the kafa'i, which the kafa'i is the type of farad, which is a type of obligation that if a certain number of individuals do it, that's sufficient, then it no longer becomes an obligation on the rest of the people. But if nobody stands up or not a sufficient number of people stand up to do it, then the sin goes on everybody in that area, wherever that becomes an obligation. So like an example of that would be the Salatul Janaiz, the Janazah, the funeral prayer. It's an obligation upon the people as a whole to do this. And as long as a sufficient number of people stood up and did it to the point where it's done in a sufficient manner, then it's enough. And then the obligation, the other people are relieved of that obligation, and then they don't have to do it. But if nobody does it, a Muslim dies, and we're talking about an actual Muslim who's on the Quran and the Sunnah, and he's practicing his religion properly. He's not a caller to bid'ah. He's not a caller to any foolishness or liberalism or anything like that. And he dies, and the people who don't pray on him, or then of course then it becomes a sin on the whole Muslim community in that area, because it's an obligation for them as a whole. And if a sufficient number of people don't do it, then they all take the sin. Okay, and some people put the Eid prayer into this category, whereas other people differ and say that the Eid prayer is actually Farad al-Ain. This is an issue, inshallah, that we'll go over in Bulugh al-Maram, inshallah. This is not the place for that. But that's just another example of Farad al-Kafa'i. Farad al-Kafa'i is that people who, if enough people stand up and do it, then it yasqut ala al-akhirin. You know, the wujub is no longer applicable to the rest of the people, that it becomes mustahab if they do it. So if like 40 or 50 people stand up and do the janazah, that's more than sufficient for the people to stand up and do janazah. So now you doing it, it becomes a mustahab, it becomes a sunnah. But it's no longer an actual obligation, because that obligation has been fulfilled. Alright, so that's the farad. So here he's saying that faridatun ala hadhihi al-ummah. So the issue here, when he's talking about al-hijrah, is he saying that the hijrah is farad ayn, or is it farad al-kafa'i? Now, of course, that depends on the situation, inshallah, and that's what we're going to get into once we go over the ayat, inshallah. So he said, faridatun ala hadhihi al-ummati, so the ummah of Islam, min balad al-shirk. And here he only mentioned balad al-shirk, which is this would be in terms of the faridah. All right, because if he's saying that it's farad al-ayn, and of course if the person, he lives in a country where the people are worshiping idols, then it will become more of an obligation for that person to, of course, get to a land of tawheed, where he can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wahdahu la sharika lahu. Now, does that mean that hijrah is only from a country where shirk is committed, or where it's a country of shirk? Then no. That's not the case, because a person can even make hijrah even from a Muslim country, from one Muslim country where disobedience is rampant and the person is having a hard time practicing his religion, and he can make hijrah to another Muslim country, where the Muslim country that he's going to is more like they're on obedience, they're studying the religion, they're practicing the religion, and he can practice his religion a lot more freely. And the same thing goes for even making a hijrah from a kafir country, from a country that called intashara fihi al-kufr wa tasaytara alayhi al-kufr, so where like kufr is rampant, and going to another country which is also fihi kufr, but it's akhaf, and the person could practice his religion. And this was the case when the Sahaba, when they made the hijrah from Mecca, they left Mecca because of the problems that they were facing with the mushrikeen, and they went to Habasha, which is Ethiopia, which is not just Ethiopia, because Habasha is actually that whole region. So to actually sit there and say that Habasha is only Ethiopia, that's not correct, because this is when the Westerners, they came and cut the countries up, and they chopped different parts off, and they made like Ethiopia this and Somalia that and Djibouti this and Eritrea. They tried to like cut all the countries up in little bits and bobs, but Ethiopia is actually that whole region. So Habasha, when we talk about Habasha, well, Habasha, not Ethiopia, but Habasha, it refers to that whole region. All right, so, but when they went and they stayed with Najashi, and at the time, of course, Najashi, he died on Islam, he became Muslim, but at the time when they made hijrah to Najashi, he was a Christian, a Nasrani. So at that time, so they were leaving a place of, severe kufr, where they were being punished and mistreated, to a place of less kufr, where they could practice their religion and be freer about practicing their religion without having any sort of harm done to them. So that's another type of hijrah. So the person, he leaves off a country of major disobedience, major ma'asiyah wal atham, and he tries to go to a country where he could practice his religion. So he said, then he said, إلى بلد الإسلام وهي باقية إلى تقوم الساعة. And of course, this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which he's going to mention. He's, in a minute, he said, ولا تنقطع الهجرة حتى تنقطع توبة ولا تنقطع توبة حتى تطلع الشمس من مغربها. And this hadith is in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed and Sunan Abi Dawood, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that the hijrah is not cut off. It's not done away with. Like it's not done. It's not finished. حتى تنقطع توبة until حتى تنقطع توبة until Toba is finished. Until Toba, and Toba of course is not finished until the sun rises in the west. So once the sun rises in the west, then there's no Toba. That's the end of Toba, because everybody at that point is going to believe. So at this point, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to accept the Toba of a person who hasn't already made Toba from before that event. He said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, the meaning of this is that, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ توفاهم, all right, توفيا, it means to die. So توفاهم الْمَلَائِكَةُ, it means that the malaika take their souls. So these, of course, are talking about the malaika that are placed in charge with taking the souls of the children of Adam, of Bani Adam. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. ظَالِمِي here is a hal. And a hal, it means that this is the state that they're going to be, that their souls are going to be taken in. That their souls are going to be taken, and they're in a state of oppressing themselves. Now, ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and this in the Arabic language is called a hal. ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ. So they're going to say to them, and of course the they here is referring back to the malaika, and they're going to say to the people that were oppressing themselves and they died in the state, قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ. Like, what state of affairs were you in? Like, what was your state when you were on the earth? قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And then they're going to say, oh, we were like weak and oppressed in the earth, kept down and transgressed upon. So this is like their excuse of why they were oppressing themselves. Qalu. So the angel said to them, Qalu, alam takun aradullahi wasi'atan fatuhajiru fiha. So was the earth of the earth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for you not? That Allah created was not vast enough for you to migrate therein, where you can just leave the place where you were in. Because if you were being oppressed to the point where you couldn't practice your religion, you couldn't just leave and go to another place and practice your religion. So these people, their final abode is going to be the Jahannam. وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. And this, of course, is the worst of all of the final destinations for a person, because it's an everlasting destination. Allah al-Musta'an wa Allah yahmina. Allah yaqina adhabu yawma yab'athu ibadah. So he said, إِلَّا وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ حِيلَةً وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ سَبِيلًا. And of course, now he's saying إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ, the real mustadafin, the real people that didn't have the means to travel, to leave, maybe from lack of wealth, from sickness, or maybe the family, and they couldn't. Well, he's going to say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give part of that, إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ, from the men and the women, وَالْوِلْدَانِ, children. So from the مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ, so from the men, the women, the children, لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ حِيلًا. And a hila is like a maneuver, to try to it could be used in a bad sense, and it could be used in a good sense. And this in this instance is used in a good context, because it's a hila which they couldn't maneuver their way out to try to find some type of, construct some type of plan to get out of their situation. They just didn't have the means to do that. They didn't have the ability to do that. And even if they could come up with a plan, then they didn't have the ability to execute it. So, and this is a hila, but a hila can also be used in a bad context. For example, when Imr Qais, when he was talking about, when he was in his poem, the Mu'alaqa, when he was trying to sneak into the girl's room, he said, and she said to him, وَمَا لَكَ حِيلَةً, وَمَا لَكَ حِيلَةً. And of course, this was the whole thing about him trying to sneak in and maneuver his way to this, and that's where she said, فَقَالَتْ يَمِينُ اللَّهِ مَا لَكَ حِيلَةً وَمَا أَنْ أَرَىٰ أَنْكَ الْغَوَايَةَ تَنْجَلِي وَمَا أَنْ أَرَىٰ منك عنك الغواية الضلالة تنجلي يعني تنجلي يعني خلاص كاشف للناس. So everybody can see it. It's very, very plain that you're on this complete misguidance, and you're maneuvering in what you're trying to do. So this, of course, is a hila. And similar to that, the better example of that would be the example of Bani Israel and what they tried to do, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He ordered them that to abandon fishing on a Saturday, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested them, and Allah would make it that on the other days when they were trying to fish, that the fish wouldn't come to their nets, but the fish would come and they would be playing on the water, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, shura'an, it means ظاهرا على الماء. You know, that when the fish will come and they right there, like right on the top of where they could see them from the water, they could actually see them. But that would be on a Saturday where they couldn't fish. And this was a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they said, okay, look, this is what we're going to do then. We'll put the nets in the water on a Friday and we'll pull the nets out on a Sunday. So that way, technically, we didn't fish on a Saturday. And of course, this is a hila. This is like what they try to do. They try to devise this plan to get around the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, you know, look at the punishment that they got for that. Allahumma musta'an. So for these people, they couldn't devise a plan to make hijrah because they just didn't have the ability and the means, or whatever the case may be. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ سَبِيلًا. So the last exception are the people that وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ سَبِيلًا. So they don't know the way out. All right. So this could be either, for example, for a person that doesn't know the way to get from one place to another. Obviously, that's not applicable nowadays. Obviously, with the Google Maps and, you know, GPS tracking and all this type of stuff that we have nowadays. But back in those days, you had to have a guide to take you from one place to another, or else, or even if, like, let's say that you had to go from one country to another that required being in a ship, like when they had to go to Ethiopia or Habasha, like I said, they had to get in a ship and go to the ship. They had to have a guide, somebody who was familiar with the direction that they had to go in and everything to make sure that they got to the right place. So this is another condition that the person has, that ability to get there, to be guided to that place. And if he doesn't have that ability, where he might go to a wrong place or a place that might bring him into more danger, and he waits for that opportunity where he has the guide and he has the means and he has everything that's there for him to leave, and he leaves. You know, if he's got his family, he leaves with his family, but not to put them into more danger, and in the process of leaving, to expose them to more danger than they might have been exposed to if they were staying, because maybe he ends up in a country that's worse. You know, so Allah musta'an. So to have the means to leave, a plan, he can devise a plan, all the capabilities of strength and food and everything that the person is going to need to suffice himself on the way to get there to the place where he's going, especially if he's with his family, and also to be able to direct himself to the correct place that he's going, where he doesn't end up in more danger. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَأُولَٰئِكَ عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَعْفُوَ عَنْهُمْ. And asa in the Quran, it always means that it's going to happen. And this is a statement of Imam al-Tabari, because the word asa in the Arabic language, it actually has the meaning of al-ishfaq wa tama' fi qurb shay. So that you're hoping that this is going to happen because because of the closest. You're hoping that it's getting near. And of course, it has the same meaning in the Quran, but when it has the meaning, when we say it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala an yaf'al shay, then in the Quran, of course, this means tahqiq. This is going to happen. So where it says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَعْفُوَ عَنْهُمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them if they do this. If they have this excuse, because obviously this is going back to the مُسْتَضَعْفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ حِيلَةً وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ سَبِيلًا. It's going back to those people. So for those people, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَعْفُوَ عَنْهُمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them if they have this excuse, and that they will be forgiven. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَفُوًّا غَفُورًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, is the pardoner and the forgiver of sins, that he pardons and he forgives the sins. All right, so but only if that person has that excuse. Now, as we saw with the first person, he said that إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَفَّاهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ ظَالِمِي أَنفُسِهِمْ قَالُوا فِيمَا كُنْتُمْ قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He said كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, but that wasn't in the reality of his situation. The reality of his situation, it was either just fear or cowardice or laziness or whatever the case may be for that person, but he had the means and he had every capability of leaving, but he didn't leave. Whereas the other people, they wanted to leave. And they had it in their hearts to leave, but they didn't have the abilities. They didn't have the capability or the means or the plan, or the ability to devise a plan or the way to direct themselves out of the place where they're at to the place where they need to go. But they really wanted to leave, and they had it in their hearts to leave. And as soon as they had the means to leave, they leave. So there's a difference between those two people. One that makes an excuse, and the person that really has a valid excuse, and he doesn't want to be in that situation. So those people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives, and the other person, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, مَأْوَاهُمْ جَهَنَّمْ وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا, that their final abode and their final destination will be Jahannam. وَسَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. And inshallah, we got one more ayat with some speech from Imam al-Baghawi, inshallah, that we'll save for the next lesson, inshallah, because this is sufficient for now. إلى هنا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.